Welcome to Convergence. My name's Mike Doran. Albert Einstein said among the most difficult problems in all of physics was the Earth's magnetic field. My name's Michael Doran, and I argue that the Earth's magnetic field is among the most difficult problems in all of biology. Today I want to talk about cephalopods. Basically, it's an animal that includes the squids, the octopus, the cuttlefish, and the nautilus. The reason I want to talk about cephalopods is because they're extremely intelligent creatures that as the science has converged and shone its light on other fields, this is a very interesting animal or set of animals, because it came way before intelligent primates or mammals, things that we think of as intelligent, and yet it is an intelligent creature. So if you look at what the science has produced in terms of the tree of life, and then the genetics, the DNA research that has occurred, it shows that these creatures came way early in the tree of life, low branches, and yet it has these creatures have this intelligence, which indicates that the intelligence comes from the deep past. Specifically, cephalopods dominated the Ordovician period, which is 485.4 million years ago to and this period lasted for about 40 million years. This is long again before primates and other creatures that we consider intelligent. And here these creatures are displaying incredible amount of gray matter and intelligence. So that in and of itself is really interesting to me. And the things that I've been talking about here have to do with what, in a large scale way, alters the carbonation levels in the ocean, and surface flows go over the oceans and alter cloud microphysics. So these creatures are not they're not large scale. They exist and they're part of this, but they're not a huge part of this. But it's an interesting creature to talk about because, again, it gives us an idea about the intelligent part of a living Earth. So, and one part of this that really needs to be talked about is that we're talking about multiprocessing. So if you've heard about how we use multiprocessing today, so for instance, if a researcher is trying to find a new drug, sometimes what they'll do is they'll ask for help, for computing help, and they'll create a network of a bunch of PCs with a problem to solve to look for, say, a new drug, and to model for it, and to take advantage of the power of a network with many computers. And this is called multiprocessing. And this is really what early life was. It was about multiprocessing. And since life today is a creation of that multiprocessing, it's no surprise that there are many creatures, maybe some having a smaller role than others, but in combined, that intelligence is what produces a living Earth today. If we go back in time again to clouds that are supercooled, they're in electromagnetic fields, and this is before there were cells, and there were nucleotides, DNA, RNA, specifically RNA is what the research is indicating, in the clouds. And I like to use the analogy of electrophoresis. So with electrophoresis, you put a sample of nucleotides on a gel strip, and then you have an anode and a cathode field that you create. And in that field, the sample that you put in the gel of amplified DNA, which then migrates depending upon the size of the molecule, the charges on the molecule, its shape, whether it's a mirror image. All these different factors play into how the set of nucleotides will migrate in electrophoresis. And then when you put a coloring agent, you'll see these bandings. And that's how we can tell what the sequence is of the nucleotide, right? This is the kind of the state of the science right now. What I'm talking about is when you had nucleotides in supercooled cloud droplets, it affected their freeze rate much the same way the banding did, or does. And since you have a different shape of a cloud droplet as it freezes, it affects the rate at which it freezes. The fundamental problem again was the Earth's magnetic field. This is the problem that was being solved by this early form of life. If the Earth's magnetic field is too strong, it becomes Saturn or Uranus or Jupiter and a dead planet. If it's too weak, because it captures gases, if it's too weak, space weather, the sun, and its radiation and its winds strip away the atmosphere, and again, you have a dead planet. So you have to have just the perfect amount of magnetic field to capture the right amount of atmosphere. And this is the problem that the nucleotides were solving for, because if you changed clouds, you changed lightning globally, and with the change of lightning globally, you changed the Earth's magnetic field. This is the number one problem that life had to and has solved for 3.7 billion years. So obviously in the process of doing this, life has become more complex. And the process of doing this required multiprocessing, in that there were multiple droplets of nucleotides in clouds all around the Earth over a long period of time. It looks like, based on the paleo evidence, that there was about 300 million years of nucleotides becoming more complex before even the first cell evolved. Now, what I'm adding to this electrophoresis model is alternating currents. So when you have a anode and a cathode in, you see this migration in the sample, and that's how you see the banding, and you can tell what the nucleotides are. But if you add an alternating current to it, the nucleotides have a number of hydrogen atoms in their chemistry. And what happens with electromagnetic waves is at the quantum level, you're going to see probabilistic movements of electrons, which means that you're going to have corresponding movements of protons. And those movements result literally in a different molecule, and then therefore a different rate at which they move in a gel, but also a different rate at which a ice crystal would form. And so if you can imagine, instead of a gel and nucleotides migrating in it, if you have an ice crystal that forms different, like a snowflake, but with asymmetry, you get movements that result in freeze patterns that are different on both sides of the field. You have a field here and a field here. But because there's an alternating current, actively you're going to see a change in molecules depending upon the type of resonances involved. And what we know is that there are Schumann resonances, and there are different types of resonances. The resonance have to do with a wave pattern going around the world, bouncing off the ionosphere. And the fundamental resonance is created by that, but then you add higher frequency over that. And if you can imagine, the higher frequency waves are going to correspond to more movement of the electrons, more probabilistic movement, and then you're therefore going to get a more quantum type of change in the nucleotides that are migrating or changing the cloud microphysics. And so it's only in the air during the time when the clouds are supercooled and they're freezing that you get this dynamic. And then later when the nucleotides fall back into the ocean and replicate or slowly evolve into where they have cells that they form a symbiotic relationship with, or the levels of carbon dioxide where this is a symbiotic relationship. It's during those periods of time that there is not this quantum calculation going on. And it's my view that this is the reason for sleep, because the chemistries that evolved come from this dynamic. And so therefore there has to be a period of time, even if life begins to mimic these fields and then mimic resonances in these tissues, you're still going to need time for that chemistry based on its history to rest, to go back and reform, so that then you can have this conscious period of time. And I believe this is the reason for sleep. Now, the reason I'm bringing up all this is because cephalopods actually sleep. There's new studies that are coming out that show that octopuses, for instance, will sleep 2 hours out of, or 4 hours out of a 24-hour day, and most of it is just a inactive phase. And then they even have a REM phase, and again, so you're going to have different frequencies that produce the sleep phase, a different frequency that produces the REM stage, and then a different frequency that produces active awareness and maybe even acute awareness, higher frequencies, higher resonances. This is precisely what occurs when a lightning storm is close by. You're going to get higher frequencies. It's like taking a hammer and hitting a bell. Every time lightning strikes, it perturbs the resonances. We see them in the sky, but we are also seeing them in the brains of not only complex life like us, but also cephalopods, which go back to this earlier period of time in life. This is very indicative to me that what we're not talking about so much is evolution of nerves per se. We're talking about a fundamental chemistry that evolved in the sky. The basic building blocks of intelligence come from this period in the sky where you had basically quantum calculations going on. Now, the difference between what's going on in the sky and what went on in the sky and what goes on in brain tissue, nervous tissue, is that instead of having migrations of nucleotides in ice, where the type of migration and then the freeze rate would be changed by the quantum type of calculations that were going on actively in the clouds, is that what we're talking about with nerve signals is an entanglement where the actual signal is changed depending upon how it interacts not just with one part of the DNA, but the other part of the DNA. And the entanglement is what causes this quantum brain, this quantum calculation. It's a little bit different than what I'm talking about in terms of ice crystals and the rate at which they freeze, and then the intelligent way that lightning would have occurred, where the nucleotides could be both a feedback and a model. And again, it's a model that's massively parallel. And then life, different forms of life, is a subset of that massively parallel system, is what now today, with the nucleotides out of the sky and inside cellular life around the world, collectively they solve this problem for the Earth's magnetic field. One of the things that's interesting here too is you get in order to get really large scale low frequency things going on with decarbonation and surface lows, you have to start small. So in other words, you start with cellular life, which has, because of this mechanism, has selective pressure for it to stay simple. And then you have more complex multicellular life interacting with the simple life that, again, its general purpose is to modulate or dampen Earth's magnetic field. And then you have larger and larger life forms that then interact with the intermediate forms. Again, though, the same problem is being solved massively parallel. So the cephalopods, they consume smaller life, and they dream, which is, again, very interesting. The other thing about cephalopods is they, pardon me, they haven't evolved to be poisonous. And so what I mean by that is, because there's this interdependency to go from something very small to something very large, you see cephalopods doing things like changing their colors and their shapes to camouflage them and protect themselves a little bit. But they haven't really evolved for them to be toxic for the larger creatures that consume them, and then are also part of this food chain. It's again selective pressure, not from other life competing with them, but rather it's selective pressure from the living Earth itself that if they were to become toxic to larger life forms and evolve some kind of defense mechanism that hurt other life forms that didn't result in the proper calculus to produce a living Earth, a living Earth magnetic field, then they would be wiped out. So they have to survive within the context of selective pressure that solves the problem of the living Earth. And this, to me, comes back to what the intelligence of life really is, in terms of what our roles as human beings, as not just the solution for living Earth, but we're the dominant species. But our role to be consistent with what life is trying to do in a massively parallel way, we have to be more like shepherds or stewards of life. And by knowing what the mechanism here, which is an electrical mechanism, that life is taking its nucleotides, its intelligence, its quantum brain, in a massively parallel way of solving the Earth's magnetic field. I think we have to look especially at larger life forms that are doing this. So, for instance, if you're talking about a whale that's eating phytoplankton and then going to the bathroom, it's changing the chemistry of the phytoplankton, which is taking light energy, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then putting it into the ocean in a form of what it processes, the whale processes the phytoplankton into and basically into waste that we think of as waste, but is actually carbon dioxide ultimately at the surface of the ocean, so that when a surface low goes by, it picks up that carbonation, puts it into clouds, and changes the way the clouds are behaving in a calculated way. And so larger life forms like that are very important, in my view, in terms of dampening the Earth's magnetic field. Same with some of the larger trees and fires that we have. Same with some of the life forms that we have in our rivers. Same with reef systems and grassy parts of the ocean, where these conversions back and forth in this creation and the carbon cycle is occurring. So you have to understand what the mechanisms are. And what I'm talking about here is fundamentally different than the current model of CO2 as a greenhouse gas, and essentially the Earth's magnetic field as some randomly occurring feature of a double domino. It's not. It's a product of a calculus, and a calculus of a quantum brain, a calculus of intelligence that fits in very, very tiny creatures, and yet it still has a very powerful calculating feature. Okay, I think that's all I have today. I do want to get, in the next episode, get into the redwood forest, but I would like to go to the redwood forest and actually see if I can film and just give you a feeling of what it's like with these giant trees. I need to save up for a different lens. This lens here is designed for just this kind of thing here. But at some point I want to do that. I definitely want to go to some of the local dams, or maybe even travel to a big dam like Mead and explain what the effect of the dams are with this different mechanism. All right, have a good one, and thank you for watching. Please like if you can, or subscribe if you want.